The fall his grandmother died, a 10-year-old boy in Ashe County, North Carolina, found a shoebox on the top shelf of her closet full of small envelopes, each one labeled in handwriting he could barely read. The envelopes were made of brown paper, the kind you fold yourself from grocery sacks. Each one was sealed with a piece of tape that had gone yellow and brittle on the front. In pencil, in handwriting that trembled slightly at the ends of the letters, were names: Big Red, 6-week, Bloody Butcher. He did not know what the names meant. He opened one envelope and poured the contents into his palm. Seeds, small, dry, lighter than they looked. Tomato seeds in one, flat bean seeds in another, dark red corn kernels in a third, the color of something between rust and wine. He brought the shoebox home and set it on the kitchen table. His father looked at it the way you look at something that belongs to the dead, with tenderness and no particular use in mind. "Those are your grandmother's seeds," he said. "She kept them every year. Saved the best, threw out the rest in the spring." Without asking permission, the boy dug up a section of his grandmother's garden, the quarter-acre behind her house that had grown nothing for 2 years, and planted every seed in the shoebox. Envelope by envelope, row by row, following the names he could barely read. The neighbors on the road saw him. Mrs. Caldwell, who grew Better Boy tomatoes from hybrid seeds she bought at the co-op each April, leaned on her fence and watched with the expression of someone watching a child do something harmless and pointless at the same time. "Honey, those seeds could be 40 years old. They probably won't even come up." They came up. Everyone. Nobody expected that, and nobody expected what happened next. If stories of grandmothers who saved more than anyone knew. Seeds that carry memory and the kind of quiet inheritance that outlasts everything mean something to you. Subscribe and stay with us. Tell us where you're watching from. We read everyone. Ruth McBride had lived in Ashe County for 87 years and had never once bought a seed from a store. She was the 7th of 12 children. Raised on a farm a few miles north of Jefferson, where the Blue Ridge folds into itself and the valleys hold fog the way a cup holds water, her family grew and preserved most of what they ate. Sauerkraut in 65-gallon barrels shared with neighbors, green beans canned in August and eaten in February, corn dried on the stalk and ground for bread, and every fall. Without exception, her mother walked the garden rows, chose the best fruit from the strongest plants, and saved the seeds, dried them on wax paper, folded them into envelopes made from grocery sacks, wrote the name in pencil, put them on the shelf. Ruth learned this the way she learned everything, by standing next to her mother and watching. She carried the practice into her own marriage, her own garden, her own 60 years behind the house on the road outside Jefferson. Every fall, the same ritual: choose the best, save the seed, write the name. The pencil got shakier as the decades passed, but the envelopes kept filling. The boy did not understand any of this when he opened the shoebox. He was 10. He knew his grandmother had grown tomatoes that were bigger than anything at the grocery store and uglier than anything in the seed catalog. He knew she had a way of looking at a plant that was different from looking. She called it watching. "Don't just look at a plant," she told him once, kneeling beside him in the garden when he was 7. "Watch it. There's a difference." He watched now. He planted the big red tomatoes in the row nearest the fence, where the morning sun hit first. He planted the 6-week beans along the trellis his grandmother had built from locust posts she cut herself. He planted the Bloody Butcher corn in the back row, where the soil was deepest. He kept a notebook pencil like hers and wrote down the date he planted each row, the date the first leaves appeared, the height at 1 week, 2 weeks, 3. His father let him do it. "No harm in it," he said, which was not the same as believing in it. His father bought Better Boy and Early Girl hybrid tomatoes from the co-op every spring. The same varieties Mrs. Caldwell grew, the same varieties every serious gardener in Ashe County grew. Bred for yield, bred for uniformity, bred in a laboratory in a state that had never seen Appalachian fog. The shoebox seeds were none of those things. They were small and old and wrinkled and had no barcode and no plastic packaging and no guarantee printed on the back. They had only one thing the hybrids did not. They had been here before. What Ruth had done for 60 years did not have a name in her vocabulary. She called it saving seeds. Scientists would call it something else: directional selection, local adaptation, landrace development. The words do not matter, the process does. Every fall, Ruth walked her garden and looked at her tomatoes. Not all of them, the best ones. The plant that fruited heaviest, the plant that held its leaves longest into October, the plant that came through the July fog without spots on its skin when the others did not. She saved seeds only from that plant, The rest she composted. The following spring, those saved seeds carried the genes of the survivor. They germinated in the same soil under the same fog. Facing the same fungal pressure that had tested their parent, the ones that thrived became the next generation's seed source. The ones that didn't were composted in turn. 60 years of this. 60 rounds of selection, not in a laboratory with controlled variables and fluorescent lights, but in a quarter-acre garden in Ashe County where the fog rolls in before dawn and the blight lives in the valley the way certain families live in certain hollows quietly, persistently. And for generations, the hybrids at the co-op were bred differently. They were crosses two parent lines combined to produce a uniform, high-yielding first generation. They performed well on average soil in average climates. They were designed to be predictable, but prediction requires assumptions, and the assumptions were made in a seed lab in the Midwest, not in the fog of Ashe County. The hybrids had never met this soil. They had never met this blight. They had never met this altitude, this moisture, this particular way the mountain morning settles on a leaf and stays. Ruth's seeds had met all of it. They had met it 60 times and survived every meeting. The boy did not know any of this. He only knew that his grandmother had kept these seeds when she could have bought new ones, and that she was not the kind of woman who kept things without reason. He wrote in his notebook after the first big red tomato set fruit in late June. Big red first fruit, 1.8 pounds. Mrs. Caldwell's better boys across the fence were already ripening half a pound each, red and round and uniform. His big red was lumpy, heart-shaped, and almost 4 times heavier. It was not pretty. It was not what the catalog would call a tomato, but it was what 60 years of watching had made. Then the fog came in thicker than usual, and it brought something with it. The first failure was his own fault. He planted the bloody butcher corn 3 inches deep instead of 1.5. The kernels sat in cold clay too long, and half of them rotted before they could push through. His father saw the patchy row and said what fathers say when they want to teach without being cruel: corn needs light to find its way up. Even your grandmother knew that. The boy dug up the dead seeds, replanted at the right depth, and waited. 7 days later, dark red shoots broke the surface in a line so straight his father stopped on the way to the truck and looked at it without comment. The second failure was not his fault. In early June, deer found the 6-week beans, the flat green variety that Ruth's family had grown since the 1920s, the beans that produced 2 harvests a year when nothing else in Ashe County could manage one. The boy had 14 seeds left in the envelope. He planted every one. The deer came through the garden fence on a Tuesday night, ate the vines down to stubs, and left tracks in the soft soil like punctuation marks. At the end of a sentence the boy had not finished writing. He sat on the porch the next morning looking at the stripped trellis. Then he went to the barn, found a roll of chicken wire left over from a coop his grandmother had kept years ago, and built a fence around the bean row using locust posts he cut from the same stand she had used for her trellises. Cost: nothing. Materials: hers. He replanted the last of the 6-week seeds inside the wire. They climbed the trellis without knowing they were the final envelope's worth of 60 years of selection. The neighbors had been watching. Store seeds are bred for this county, son. Those old things don't have blight resistance. One bad summer and he'll lose the lot. Seeds aren't memories. They're crops, and crops come from the co-op. His grandmother was a fine woman, God rest her, but saving seeds in a shoebox doesn't make them better than what science can do. The fog kept rolling in each morning, heavier than the year before, and in the first week of July, brown spots appeared on Mrs. Caldwell's Better Boy tomatoes. Late blight moves through fog the way a rumor moves through a small town by the time you can see it. It is already everywhere. Phytophthora infestans, the same organism that caused the Irish potato famine. It thrives in cool, wet conditions, exactly the conditions that Ashe County's mountain mornings provide every July. When the fog settles into the valleys before dawn and does not lift until the sun clears the ridge, Mrs. Caldwell saw the spots first, brown lesions on the lower leaves of her Better Boys, spreading upward through the canopy like a stain that could not be wiped. Within a week, the undersides of the leaves showed the white fuzz of active sporulation. Within 10 days, her 40 plants, the same hybrid variety she had bought from the co-op for 11 consecutive years, were finished. The fruit softened and collapsed on the vine. The smell was sweet and wrong. The smell of something alive becoming something that was not. The boy's father lost his tomatoes the same week. Same variety, same source, same result. Across the county, wherever Better Boy and Early Girl and celebrity hybrids had been planted, The blight followed the fog and did what it had always done to plants that had never been asked to survive it. The hybrids were bred in a seed lab in the Midwest. They were bred for size, color, uniformity, and shelf life. They were not bred for Phytophthora infestans in an Appalachian valley at 3,000 feet, carried on fog that arrives before dawn. They had no memory of this place. They had never needed one until now. The boy's big red tomatoes stood in the row nearest the fence. Green leaves, no spots, no lesions, no white fuzz. Fruit hanging heavy on the vine, 2 pounds. 2.5, heart-shaped and rough-skinned, the ugliest and healthiest tomatoes on the road. The 6-week beans behind the chicken wire were climbing hard, pods fat and clean. The bloody butcher corn stood with dark red stalks that did not bend. 60 years of Ruth's selection had done what no lab had thought to do. She had chosen survivors not once, but every year in this soil, under this fog, against this exact pathogen. The resistance was not engineered, it was remembered. One evening after the rain stopped, Mrs. Caldwell stood at the fence between her garden and the boys. On her side, the better boys hung like brown rags. On his side, the big reds glowed in the last light. She stood there until the fog came back. The next morning, she walked over. She came through the garden gate without knocking on the door. The boy was crouched between the big red rows, writing something in his notebook. He looked up. He did not speak. Mrs. Caldwell walked the length of the tomato row the way you walk through a room where something impossible has happened, slowly, stopping often, looking at things more carefully than you have ever looked at anything in a garden before. She touched a leaf, no spots. She lifted a fruit heavy, warm from the morning sun, the skin thick and scarred in places where the plant had healed itself from something that had killed everything across the fence. She set it back gently. She walked past the 6-week beans, pods full and curved, the flat green shape of a variety that had been in one family since before the county had paved roads. She walked past the bloody butcher corn, dark red stalks, almost maroon, standing straight in soil that Ruth had composted for 6 decades. She came back to where the boy was kneeling. "Where did you get those seeds?" He closed his notebook. He looked at her with the face of a child who has been watching something prove itself and does not yet know the word for what he is feeling. "Grandma's closet." Mrs. Caldwell looked at the big reds one more time. Then she looked across the fence at her own garden, the better boys she had bought from the co-op every April for 11 years. Now hanging from blackened stems in the sweet rotting smell of blight, she looked back at the boy. "She knew things we forgot, didn't she?" It was not a question. The boy did not answer it. The fog was lifting. The big reds caught the first full light of morning, red and heavy and alive, holding 60 years of memory in their skin. That fall, the boy did what his grandmother had done every fall for 60 years. He walked the garden and chose the best big red on the strongest plant, the one that had fruited heaviest, held its leaves longest, come through the blight, without a mark. He cut it open on the kitchen table, scooped the seeds into a jar of water, and waited 3 days for the good seeds to separate from the bad. He dried them on wax paper the way Ruth had dried them. He folded a new envelope from a brown grocery sack. He wrote on the front in pencil, "Big Red Year 1. He placed it in the shoebox next to the envelope his grandmother had written, her handwriting and his, side by side, hers trembling at the edges. His still learning to be steady, the same seeds, the same garden, the same ritual, carried forward by a hand that had not yet learned to shake. Mrs. Caldwell came by before the first frost. She did not ask for advice. She asked for seeds. The boy opened the shoebox and counted out 20 big red seeds into an envelope, wrote the name on the front, and handed it to her without ceremony. 2 other families on the road asked before Christmas. The Ashe County Seed Library in West Jefferson received a new deposit that winter, a small brown envelope labeled in a child's handwriting. Big Red Ashe County adapted. George Washington Carver once said, "When you do the common things in life in an uncommon way, you will command the attention of the world." A boy in Ashe County did the most common thing in farming. He planted a seed. He just planted one that remembered where it came from. The seeds remembered what the soil needed. All they needed was someone willing to plant them. What has someone left you that you have not opened yet? Tell us in the comments. Tell us where you are watching from. Subscribe, and we will see you next week.